And welcome back, everyone. Today, once again, I wanted to talk about some nice moments of the FIDE Grand Swiss round number 6. And one game in specific I want to have a look at today, actually from the Women's Grand Prix, because one game there was played by Tsolakidou Stavroula, who played one idea which I actually gave in my recent King's Indian course for the black side. So I'm about to show you what is my secret idea in the G3 King's Indian, which Stavroula also played with the black pieces. And as you can see, it's this move rook e8. So this is the suggestion I'm giving in the in my recent course, and I thought it was quite interesting. And Tsolakidou actually played a very nice model game, so I think it would be nice to have a look at it. So the idea of rook e8, first of all, rook e8 is anyway a very flexible move. Let me quickly show you how it came there. White started with one knight f3, and then we got this position after rook e8. So first of all, after knight c3, black could of course play knight bd7 here, and after e4, e5, it's going to transpose to some of the bigger lines, which is also possible. But the idea which Stavroula also played and also which I'm giving in my course is actually bishop d7, with the idea to prepare e5, since e5 just yet is not possible because in the end white is just grabbing the pawn on e5. And bishop d7 is preparing e5 on the next move. And in the game, white has played the very logical move e4, which I believe to be one of the main moves. The other one, which in my eyes is even more critical, is the move bishop f4 in this position, just trying to stop the move e5. And here black goes queen c8. This is also my recommendation here. And black has numerous ideas. Well, bishop h3 is definitely the most serious one, but in some cases black could also try to play knight h5 followed by e5, sometimes also knight c6 followed by e5. With a very fresh position, computer usually gives some small advantage to white, but there's no theory here. White is probably not going to know it, and black has a lot of potential as well if he in fact manages to get e5. So white played e4. I didn't even mention white's name in this game. It was Khalilova Madinabonu. Hopefully that was not too embarrassing. Actually not sure where is she from. Uzbekistan also. Around 2150, who apparently has a pretty good run in this tournament if she's playing against Tsolakidou, who is one of the favorites in the tournament with a rating of about 2450. So white played e4, black played e5. This is the general idea. And now, of course, white can go for d5, which was also played in the game. And at first, it looks like white gets a pretty decent version of the King's Indian because black has played the move rook e8, which generally does not really fit into the position because black wants to go for f5 later on, and there he would just rather have the rook on f8. Which is true, but on the other hand, white has already played sort of close the center, which is typically not the main idea if white goes for the fianchetto, because if white has the fianchetto, typically the bishop on g2 is anyway protecting the pawn on e4, so he just keeps the tension and waits for black to take on d4 at some moment. For example, in this line here, waits for black to take on d4, and then after knight takes d4, the bishop on g2 is nicely protecting the pawn on e4. So therefore, we can kind of argument that white also didn't have the perfect setup in the King's Indian, probably with the bishop being on d3 and the pawn being on g2 would generally be a better type of development with the bishop in this exact structure. So black followed it up by a5. The typical idea here is now to put the knight to c5, and later on the rook can anyway just go back to f8. White played b3 in the game, also typical is knight e1, knight a6 here, and after knight d3, black generally has a couple of choices. Rook f8 is possible here, for example. Just slowly preparing knight e8 followed by f5. And if a3, black has a couple of different moves. I thought knight c5 was even possible to go for something like that and trying to regroup the knight towards d6. There was also a4 here, and after knight takes a4, there is this nice tactical trick with knight c5 when on the next move black is going to win back the pawn on e4. So knight e1 is also possible. Generally, what black would like to achieve is also what happened in the game, to install the knight on c5, and then later on, in some cases even, you can play b6 just to fix the knight there. White played knight e1 here, and Stavroula went for h5, which is interesting and a typical idea once the white knight leaves the f3 square, because now h4 is going to be possible without the knight capturing it. But also rook f8 immediately would have been possible again, with the idea of going knight e8 followed by f5. h5 interesting though. White played h4, stopping the plan of black by pushing h4 himself or herself. And after h4, now Stavroula played queen e7. And in the following moves, she did get a little bit worse, objectively speaking, but even from there on, she played really nicely and just outplayed her opponent. Objectively speaking, therefore knight g4 would have been a little bit better, and then just trying to prepare f5 as soon as possible like this, when black doesn't have any problems whatsoever. But she played queen e7, knight d3, b6, and she went to this structure, which is still, practically speaking, of course, completely playable, but white does have a certain objective advantage, but she needs to be very precise here. White played a4, which is still correct, and now I really liked black's move, queen f8. Generally in the King's Indian, what you always want to achieve is to trade the bishop on g7 or to activate it. Activating it doesn't always work because you would need to get rid of the pawn on e5, but exchanging it with bishop h6 is a very, very common idea, which we see in many different lines, and if black manages to achieve that, typically, at least from a strategical point of view, he has achieved quite a lot. And white immediately did not go for the most precise way. She played bishop d2. Instead, what white needed to do is actually keep the bishop with bishop b2. And after knight g4 now, maybe the move both players or white has missed, rook b e1, which prepares f3 on the next move. It would not be possible yet because of some ideas like knight e3, perhaps. Maybe bishop e3 is also possible here with knight f2 to come on the next move. This just looks like it's winning an exchange. And here white would have been clearly better with f3 to come, but still, of course, a game would be there as well. White played bishop d2, now bishop h6, rook b2, knight g4, and now white anyway captured on h6, and now black already has a pretty comfortable position just because the pawn on a5 can also not be attacked anymore if white has exchanged the darks with bishop. White played queen d2, and now queen g7, which is an interesting and possible decision, keeping the queens on the board. Also, the endgame would have been quite pleasant for black, but what I didn't fully understand was that the computer even wanted to go into this structure, which I didn't expect at all, but it turns out that white actually has no way to attack the pawn on c5 or a5, or e5 as a matter of fact. And if white goes for d6, it's actually already quite a big mistake, because after c6, now the pawn on d6 is going to become a weakness eventually, and still white doesn't have any way to actually attack the doubled pawns. And apart from that, black has a couple of ways to try and regroup, like getting f6, knight f7, knight d6 was one idea. Generally, probably not capturing on b5, at least too early, because after both cb or ab, those pawns could become pretty weak. Computer also gave some plans like knight g8, knight f6, which were all quite interesting. And yeah, objectively speaking, black was even a little bit better there. But I can totally understand the decision to keep queens on the board, just because it still looks like black is the one who is going to have some initiative on the king side. White played f3, now knight h6, very important not to block the pawn on f7, since she wants to play f5 on the next move. Bishop h3, rook f8, knight e2, king h7. That was all pretty good. And now rook g8. Generally here, what black could have done already quite earlier on some occasions was to play f4. This was the first moment where the computer said that this is in fact winning, just because the pawn on h4 is quite difficult to defend. And now after queen f6, black is preparing ideas like rook e8 on the next move, taking on e4 at some moment, and black should be winning here. But also how black played in the game, it kept a lot of pressure on white, and still black kept a very large advantage. Still here, f4 once again would have been quite powerful, with the idea that here black does not take on g2, but instead goes rook g8. And if rook g5, trying to keep the g file closed, now not taking on g5, since then the g file would actually be closed, but instead queen h3, and looks like black has a crushing attack. Black played rook g7, however, and now it was kind of white's last chance to play f4 herself, which of course also looks quite ugly, and black is much better here, but it would have kept the game going a bit longer. White played knight c1, and now just rook ag8, which was her plan anyway, to just double up on the g file. Queen e1, and now finally she went for f4, and the rest of the game was very clean, since black is just extremely active, and if g takes f4, now the whole point, queen h3, and white cannot keep everything under control. I will just briefly go through what happened in the rest of the game. White gave the exchange and tried to keep things closed, but exchange is an exchange after all. And yeah, now black was taking over the attack, and yeah, after queen h3 now white resigned because rook takes e4 is coming on the next move. So very beautiful game, and showed the plans from the black side quite nicely, even though going into the structure is, objectively speaking, a little bit risky. Still, this plan with queen f8 and bishop h6 was was pretty nice by Tsolakidou, and also from there on how she just got f5 slowly and just slowly won the game. It was pretty nice to watch. What should have black done, objectively speaking, as I said, is going knight g4 earlier on, or also rook f8 in this position would have both been maybe perhaps a little bit better objective continuations with the plan of knight e8 and f5 on the next move. So if you like this line, make sure to check out my King's Indian course, which is still coming out this year. I'm not entirely sure just when, but should be by November or December for sure. I also wanted to mention one other line here. After e5, you might have been wondering, since we talked about this h3 move in the beginning as well, it is kind of the main move if black has the knight on d7 instead of the bishop on d7. So what actually happens here, I'll just briefly show you what I recommend in my course, which is to play queen c8 first, hitting the pawn on h3. And the queen here is going to be quite useful later on. Now, taking on d4 and going knight c6. This is another benefit, by the way, of putting the bishop on d7 and not the knight on d7, that we can still attack the center immediately with knight c6 to come. Bishop e3, knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, c5, and now if bishop e3, then bishop c6, and black gets a lot of counterplay against the pawn on e4. Later on also has ideas like queen e6 with some double attack on e4 and c4, and if all of that doesn't do anything, then black still has the plan of going a6 and b5 later on as well. So those are just my recommendations here generally. What I can already tell you is that bishop f4, as I said in the beginning, is definitely the critical move here, but still black keeps a lot of practical chances, and also objectively speaking, the position is never anything worse than about 0.30 or 0.35 or something like that, if white knows all of that. So that's it for the King's Indian. I also quickly wanted to mention one nice moment in the game between Vincent Keimer and Robert Hovhannissian, which has just finished a couple of minutes ago, even though the game's already started, like, once again, 8 hours ago. So another marathon game. Yesterday it was, I think, Abdusatorov against Erdogmus, who played 8.5 hours. So the time control, of course, is not for everyone, because the games do last extremely long and you need a very high energy level. What I also still remember when I was at the FIDE Grand Swiss with Pentala Harikrishna together in Douglas 2023, so I think it was 2 years ago, in Isle of Man, and I still remember that it was extremely tiring for Hari back then, because he also had one 8-hour game, I think, already in round 1, and after that it just becomes increasingly more difficult. Everyone gets more and more tired throughout the event, and it's really not easy to keep this energy level if you have such marathon games. The game in the end, I think, lasted, so the Vincent Keimer game lasted about 120 moves. And I just wanted to show you the end of the game. Vincent grinded out this specific endgame, just to give you some reference, which is objectively a draw, but I already had a feeling from the beginning that this is not going to be a walk in the park for black, because white can just try to bring the king, and black always needs some sort of perpetual check formation, which practically speaking is very difficult to always get in a game. So this is how Vincent slowly brought his king, and at some moment he could also push his pawn. Let me give you the moment right here after rook c4. Now black does not have any more checks, and then white can push a5 on the next move. And this continued for some time still. Even here the position, I think, was still a draw objectively, but now it's getting more and more difficult for black to actually hold it with the pawn already being on a6. And Vincent improved, he put the rook to d5, which was also quite important to make more progress, because now white can always block the checks like this, and he is giving back the rook, but at the same time white gets another queen. And black did have a couple of more checks, and I wanted to jump to this moment when Vincent put the king to g8 already, which was the right way to escape all of black's checks. But now after g5, okay, Vincent played the very reasonable move queen f3 and won the game a couple of moves after that. But I saw, thanks to the engine, that white had an even quicker win. And there are two moves which do the job right here. Maybe you can find it. You can stop the video if you want to try to solve it. So again, if it's confusing to someone, this pawn is moving towards white's king, since this is the first rank. Still gonna give you a second if you want to pause the video. White has a very beautiful way to end the game immediately, and it is the move queen c6. Or queen a6, as a matter of fact. Both of those moves win just because of this mating pattern, because white has rook h7 in the end, which I thought was quite nice, and a mating pattern which you really don't see often at all, at least from my experience, especially in an endgame. So both queen a6 and queen c6 have the idea that the black king cannot give any checks because it's pinned, and if it takes, then always rook h7 mate. But of course, Vincent in the game played queen f3 and also won the game a couple of moves after that, so a very nice game by him. Overall, trying to grinding out the win eventually, but that was a study-like finish in the end. So thank you guys for watching. That was it for today. Hope you enjoyed this small dive into the King's Indian. Once again, the course is probably going to be released still this year in something like 1 or 2 months, something like that. I'll let you know once it comes on the market. So thank you guys for watching, and I'm gonna see you guys not tomorrow probably, because there's a free day at the Grand Swiss, but after that. Thank you guys.